رسول الله حبيب الله شفيع الله نبي الله.
Realize that there are many avenues of attacking our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we are concentrating in this talk on attacks against his character and persona. There are other ways of attacking Islam, to attack the Quran, to attack theology, to attack Sharia. All of them have their own defense. In this panel, we're concentrating on attacks to the persona, to the nature, to the character of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Such attacks can generally be characterized in one of three categories. The first of these categories, number one, outright lies. Sheer fabrications. Absolutely no historical basis whatsoever. And there are many examples of this. For example, the charge that the Prophet ﷺ suffered from epilepsy, that he would go into seizures and fits when the wahi came down. This is utter fabrication that was started in the Middle Ages by the Spanish Christians. Another example, that the Prophet ﷺ died in the year 666 of the Christian era. And this was propounded by, amongst other people, Peter the Venerable, the abbot of Cluny, who was very active in spreading false information about Islam, and the first person to think of translating the Quran into a Western language. Peter the Venerable was the first person to find others to translate the Quran into Latin, not to defend it, not to give da'wah, but to critique it. And of the things that he spread is that the Prophet ﷺ died in the year 666. What is this got to do with anything? Who can tell me? What is 666? The number of the beast. And so he claimed that the Prophet ﷺ was the Antichrist. Another outright lie, which was very common in much of the Middle Ages, is that the Muslims worship the Prophet ﷺ, that his name is not Muhammad but Mahund. And in fact, in many books written, even by famous English and British writers in the 13th, 14th century, we find that the Prophet is referred to as Mahund, because Mahund is the name of a devil. And so they distort in Christian theology. So they distort the name of Muhammad ﷺ, and they say his name is Mahund. Another outright lie, which has become so common, it is now an expression in the English language, which people use to this day. That expression is, if the mountain does not come to Muhammad, Muhammad will go to the mountain. This is a common expression, meaning that if the situation doesn't work out the way I wanted, I will adapt to the situation. That's an expression now. What is the basis of this expression? There is a lie that was fabricated first by the famous Francis Bacon, the famous British author who wrote in 1625, where basically he said that the Prophet ﷺ challenged the Quraysh that the mountain will come to him. And so he issued the challenge and the mountain didn't move. And so the Quraysh began to ridicule and mock him. And so he said, very well, if the mountain will not come to me, I will go to the mountain and beat the challenge in that way. Of course, this is a sheer fabrication. No such story ever happened. But it has become legendary in many books until, as I said, it is an expression in the English language. So the first category, outright lies. And this category was very common in the Middle Ages in the 17th, 18th century, but with the advent of the modern universities, with the advent of more interaction with Muslims, these types of lies are getting rarer and rarer. And for those of you who are interested, there's a very interesting book by Minow Reeves, M-I-N-O-U-R-E-E-V-E-S, called Muhammad in Europe, 1,000 Years of Western Myth-Making. Muhammad in Europe, ﷺ, 1,000 Years of Western Myth-Making, published by the NYU Press in 2003, and it gives you a lot of these lies. The second category of attacks are distorted truths. They are not lies, but something is factual, and then certain elements are read in, certain things are added, certain flavors are put in, which twist the entire thing around. And realize that there is always a negative way of representing the same fact. The glass is half empty or half full, both are true. How do you want to look at it? And the best example of this in our own sources is that of the woman who came to complain about her husband to the Prophet ﷺ. Famous story, famous hadith in Sahih Bukhari. The woman comes and complains and she says, Ya Rasulullah, my husband beats me when I pray. He forces me to break my fast, doesn't allow me to fast, and he misses Fajr regularly. So the Prophet ﷺ called the husband. He didn't just base his verdict on what the wife said. Actually, if the husband is just like that, it's like, A'udhu Billah, it's like doing kufr. I mean, he doesn't want his wife to pray or fast, just to pray Fajr himself. So the Prophet ﷺ called the man. And the man said, Ya Rasulullah, I am a young man. I come home from the fields and my wife is standing in prayer. I want the dinner to be ready. I want this and that there. So I tell her to shorten the prayer. And she's fasting every single day. And I would like to be a husband to her on these days. And she doesn't have to fast nafil fast. She can fast in Ramadan. So that's why I don't want her to pray long. I don't want her to do extra nafil fasts. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, yes, okay, nafil fasts are your husband's right. He can let you fast and he can prevent you from fasting. And you don't have to pray Surah Al-Baqarah in your salah. You can read Surah Al-Ikhlas as well. No big deal. So the Prophet ﷺ sided with the husband. The third issue of Fajr. The husband said, Ya Rasulullah, we are a family known for having a sleep problem. In other words, I try to wake up, but it's something we are known that we don't wake up except with great difficulty. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, if you really overslept Fajr, pray as soon as you wake up. In other words, if it's something you try to wake up and... So basically, the Prophet ﷺ sided with the husband in all three issues. Now the question arises, did the wife lie? The response is no. The wife was truthful. The wife was absolutely truthful, but it is a matter of perspective. And so, similarly, if this can happen with good Muslim couples, as we all know who are married here, definitely happens all the time. If this can happen with good Muslim couples, how about when somebody doesn't have iman and they read into the seerah? Of course they will distort. Of course they will change and twist. Not that they're going to lie. They will simply look at it in a twisted angle. And there are once again many examples here. For example, it is a common claim that the Prophet ﷺ in the early Medinan phase resorted to highway robbery. That he would stand on the road or basically hide himself with the Sahaba on the road, and every time a caravan went, he would just attack and rob them and take their goods and belongings. Now, initial response, A'udhu Billah, this is totally false. But you go and you look up and you find out, no, it's not totally false. It's just distorted. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba never attacked caravans unconditionally. They attacked the Quraysh. There's a big difference. There's a big difference to say that he used to attack caravans all over Arabia and he used to attack the Quraysh. The Quraysh, yes, definitely. The Sahaba would definitely find out where they're heading and attack their caravans. Why? Because of 13 years of oppression, because of being expelled from their own countries and lands, because of confiscating their property. The Quraysh expelled the Muslims, took over all their money. The Sahaba had no money when they left for Medina, the Muhajirun. These people wronged us. We have the right to do this back to them only. The Sahaba never attacked caravans of other tribes, only the Quraysh. So it's a factual statement that has been distorted. Another example, that the Prophet ﷺ orchestrated a mini Holocaust of the Jews of Medina, specifically the Banu Qurayza. Once again, yes indeed, it is true that these Jews of the Banu Qurayza were executed. But nobody gives you the details. Why? They were accused of treason. They were accused in the battle of the Ahzab, the battle of the trench, of trying to plot within the city to overthrow the Muslims. That is treason when they're surrounded by 10,000 of the Quraysh, 10,000 of the pagan armies. And within Medina, all of a sudden, the Banu Qurayza revolts. And the Banu Qurayza tries to instigate a fifth column. And they almost succeeded if Allah Azza wa Jalla had not shown their plot. Of course, treason in almost every country has extremely harsh punishments. And so the punishment given to them was not because they were Jews, it was because they committed treason. Had nothing to do with their ethnicity, with their religion. So this is true, but the way it's distorted, the way it's presented is a half-truth. Likewise, the claim that the Prophet ﷺ was initially very fond of the Christians and Jews, but later on scorned them. Factually, this is true. Initially, the Prophet ﷺ was fond of the Christians and Jews, but why? Because he was hoping that because they are people of the book, they would recognize him as a prophet. And so he was optimistic that these people will follow me. Instead, when they tried to kill him, on more than 3 occasions, the Yahud tried to kill him. When they rejected his message with the utmost severity, when they sided with the pagans, when they said to the pagans and the idol worshippers, as the Quran tells us, they told the idol worshippers, you are more rightly guided than these monotheists. The Yahud said to those who worship idols, this is a verse in the Quran, you are more rightly guided than those who worship Allah alone. This was their animosity. So yes, of course, eventually the Prophet ﷺ cut off all ties with them. All of this are distorted truths, half lies. It's a matter of perspective. So when you hear something like this, our job becomes like the job of the husband. When the wife came and complained, you contextualize. You give a frame of reference. And the third critique, we said there is 2, right? Number 1, outright lies. Number 2, distorted truths. Number 3, and this is perhaps the most difficult, attacking the cultural norms of the time. Attacking societal values that might have been acceptable in 7th century Arabia, but are not acceptable in 21st century America. And this is really the most difficult, type of critique to defend, because the average human being is not an expert in sociology, in history, in ethics. The average human being simply thinks the cultural norms of his or her civilization are the correct cultural norms and values. And they don't realize that cultural norms and values change from time to place. The values of post-Victorian England are radically different than the values of 21st century America. The sexual mores of America 200 years ago radically differ from the sexual mores of the 21st century America. These things change. And so 7th century Arabia had its own issues, which were considered permissible by Muslims and non-Muslims back then. The most classic example, slavery. The Quran, no doubt, gave a lot of rulings for slavery. But let's be honest, it didn't come and totally ban it. It did ban alcohol. It banned many things, but it didn't banish slavery. It merely gave conditions. Now, in my humble opinion, the word slavery in the English language cannot be used in a positive sentence. And the Arabic concept of riqqa, of servitude, of slavery, is radically different than the Western concept of slavery. And so I think we are fighting a losing battle if we go into this tangent and try to defend it, for example. We just gloss it over and say that was something that happened in the past. Islam doesn't require slaves to exist. It's not a necessary condition. So these are cultural values. Another thing which we don't have time to talk about, but is definitely something very important, marrying Aisha at a young age, at the age of 9, for example. Okay, and I firmly believe, by the way, that Aisha radiallahu anha was 9 years old. I know that there are other opinions out there, and there's people trying to say that she was 18, 19. I think that historically speaking, it's quite clear that she was 9 years old. And if we open this door of trying to change our history, we're getting into other problems, which I might talk about in question answer. In any case, the fact that the Prophet married Aisha at the age of 9, none of the enemies of Islam found this problematic. Abu Jahl, Abu Talib, if there was a lot, none of